Gen Z tends to not drink nearly as much as, millennials and Gen X.
You mean I don't get to just like sit in a mini lab and like drink beer all day?
95% of the grain we use is grown within 200 miles of us.
Is that really the only difference between a lager and ale is just the temperature that they're cooked at?
Fermentation can take anywhere from, 5 days to 3 weeks.
What is the process of like creating a new recipe?
Oxygen degrades beer incredibly fast.
The difference between beer in a can versus a bottle.
Every head brewer I know has had to learn how to repair equipment as it goes down.
Explain how beer is made. Clay, thanks for coming today. I think this is great to have you over.
Thanks for having me.
So you're a head brew what's your specific title? Is it brew master? Is it head brewer? Like
Chief of Brewing?
Chief of brewing?
The chief executive brewer?
Yeah. I use the term head brewer, but
Okay.
people do throw around the term brewmaster. If you're talking that, I'm the one making recipe decisions at Epic Brewing
Yeah.
and coming up with the new ideas and making final judgment calls on things, like, that I am the brewmaster. But I kind of use that term or reserve that term for, maybe I think a dozen people in the world deserve that term master.
Oh, okay.
And so I don't give that to myself. That's for people who don't have anything more to learn unless new things happen.
It's like they've perfected it.
Exactly. Like I hold that in very high regard. So I don't call myself a brewmaster.
You're a brew apprentice?
Yeah.
The guy who does the brew stuff. Okay, so and you work at Epic Brewing. So Utah, local company. Tell us a little bit about like Epic, what you do there, and then I think that will be good to kind of set the foundation, contextually what you do, and then I want to get into your experience, like how you got to where you are, what like life decisions or like what you're doing beforehand or all the things.
I'm the head brewer at Epic Brewing, which essentially means I'm coming up with the recipes, executing the recipes, making sure that we have sound SOPs that is creating excellent product in a safe way for all the employees.
SOP for the layman's out there.
Standard operating procedure.
Okay,
it's just
great.
essentially how we go about accomplishing a task.
Okay, sure.
And, we work with a lot of hot water. Obviously, there's 400 gallons of boiling liquid.
Safety first.
Exactly. There was just an injury a week and a half ago at another brewery in Salt Lake where somebody got burned and had to spend a few days in the hospital.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's a very dangerous job in certain aspects. And so safety is front of mind for, my day to day.
So, and just to be clear, when you say head brewer, does that mean like there is nobody that's above you that you have to report to about like decisions? Like if you say this needs more sugar or this needs more hops or whatever, like the buck stops with you.
Yep.
Oh,
buck
okay.
stops with me. I speak with our owners daily, but day-to-day decisions, what's going into the beer, that's all on me.
Wow.
That's cool.
Yeah.
No pressure.
No pressure at all.
Don't screw up the recipe.
I know. Well, I mean, that all being said, let's take a step back. Like, I don't imagine, at least as a person who is not involved in your industry, I don't imagine that at 10 years old, you're like, I want to craft beer when I get older. Right? That's probably not the thing. So tell us a little bit about like your journey of where you kind of came from and decided to kind of move into this career path.
I'll try and not do it too long of a story, but, I went to school at Weber State and, got an English degree, specifically journalism. And so there was definitely a part of my life that I wanted to go into journalism. And when I graduated, it just, it was a bad time for journalism. This was 2009, and it just didn't. The outlook was bleak for print media at the time, and so I took a job at FedEx and ended up being a FedEx delivery driver for 6 years.
I hear they make good money.
I don't know. Yeah.
I don't know, but sorry.
It was a good, stable job, great
That's cool.
benefits. There's also another version of me in a different timeline that stuck that out and lived a stable, happy life and never got into beer.
Yeah.
But while I was doing FedEx, I actually would listen to a lot of podcasts. And I started, when I was in college, I started making beer in my dorm room, not necessarily because I really wanted something to drink, it was the science behind it that was very intriguing to me. While I was at FedEx, I would listen to these podcasts just trying to perfect the science behind making beer at home. I was entering beer competitions all the time. And essentially I just was like, I want to get into this. I want to make sure that this is a career path, A, that I want to do, B, that I would enjoy doing and could be successful doing. And so I saved up a bunch of money, quit my job at FedEx, and got a part-time job at Epic Brewing, actually.
Oh, wow,
So I actually started at Epic Brewing. I got a job on the packaging line, and it did not, I took probably a 50% pay cut to make that transition. And so I started on the packaging line at Epic Brewing. This was, 12 years ago, I think, something like that. And I got some great advice. I had met the head brewer at the time at Epic Brewing. His name was Kevin Crompton.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to Epic was releasing a beer. They were doing a party at Gracie's downtown.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went because I wanted to, just wanted to meet some people that work in the industry, get an idea of what it's like.
Yeah.
And I had a conversation with Kevin at the time, and I asked him, I said, I've got an English degree. I don't have a hard science degree. I don't have a background in this. What would you suggest I do? Should I go, at the time there was maybe only 2 fermentation science programs in the United States.
Oh, yeah.
There's one in Chicago and then one in Davis, California.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was looking into those options, and he just looked me in the eyes and said, don't bother doing that. Take a job at a brewery and see if you like it before you invest that kind of time and
just
money.
learn on the
Exactly.
job. Yeah.
He warned me. He said, doing it at home is one thing, but then doing it at the facility and doing that hard work day to day, it's a different beast.
Yeah.
And so I took his advice. It took me I think it took a year from that day for me to save up enough savings that I could comfortably take that pay cut and get an entry level position in the beer industry. And I never really looked back from that. I learned everything from packaging. The way that a brewery works, there's generally 3 departments in the production. There's the packaging department, there's the cellar department, and the cellar department is kind of like they handle the beer from brew day, and they handle that like 2-week period during fermentation and deliver it to the packaging team.
Okay.
So that's kind of just a brief overview of the cellar. So I moved up into the cellar, learned that entire process, and then eventually after a couple of years got onto the brew house and started learning that side of things and just never really looked back.
Is all that done on site?
It is, yeah.
Just one location, all of that?
Yep. So we at Epic Brewing have an off-site warehouse just because our brewery on State Street is quite a small footprint. So we actually do make all the product there. We package all the product there. But then we have an off-site warehouse for storage because we're just crammed in that building.
Yeah. And the storage space is probably costly if you were to do it in that same area. Yeah.
Exactly.
I imagine that, like, when you talk about you were interested in the science of it, it's like, I imagine like a little kid wanting to play with like how to make crystals and like how to mix stuff and do like what because my kid's kind of in that phase right now.
Yeah.
Where she's like, I'm making my own potion, and she'll mix stuff together. And I feel like as kids we generally go through all type of phase, something like
Curiosity,
that.
yeah.
Curiosity, but like you took it to a level of making it your career, so that's really cool. So I think as far as, I mean, not being a drinker, I'm not super familiar. Like, I worked as a cocktail waiter at a franchise restaurant here in Utah, and I was able to learn more about, like, alcohol and everything there. But, like, what does it take to be in your role? Like, what are the things that you got to a point where you're like, hey, I was working for FedEx, I want to do this, I was interested in all this stuff, I got a job at Epic, starting to learn on-the-job things. Like, what are some things that you have had to learn that you're like, well, I didn't know that this was a thing, and I didn't know that people, if they want to get into space, that they should be prepared for X, Y, Z?
Yeah, there's been a lot of things come to mind that would follow that. Some of the biggest things for me currently in my role is, I didn't expect how much of a manager I need to be. I got into this industry just because I loved coming up with an idea or a flavor profile and then figuring out how I can execute that flavor profile. And that's what I love doing with being a brewer. The thing that challenged me and really made me grow as a person, as a manager, was trying to be the best manager for the rest of the employees as I possibly can. That was something that I really had to devote a lot of time and energy to becoming better at.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. I guess to look at it at a different perspective, let's say you're retiring.
Yeah.
And you're going to hire someone to replace you. What would you be looking for in terms of skill sets? I mean, the management piece is one that I hadn't thought about. I mean, and maybe, every brewery can run a little bit differently in terms of how much the brewmaster is like the manager versus like being just like over formulation or whatever it may be. I don't know how these would operate. But
yeah, I imagine it's very different from brewery to brewery, and it probably depends on the size of the brewery as well. When I'm looking, if I was going to retire and going to hire somebody, somebody who can manage people well and set them up for success is obviously something I would look at.
Mm-hmm.
Something else that's very important, and this is probably also size of brewery dependent, but us at Epic Brewing, we don't have a maintenance team or somebody that I can, if a pump starts malfunctioning or something, I don't have a person that I can call. I can call, a repairman or, somebody who manufactures those pumps or whatever piece of equipment is breaking. But from my experience, every head brewer I know has had to learn how to repair equipment as it goes down. So it's something that I didn't expect to need to learn how to, rebuild centrifugal pumps, but something that I've gotten quite good at. And, I've learned how to, wire in, exhaust fans and stuff like this, just because the beer industry is great and I love it. And we tend to work with very tight margins. And anytime that we can fix things ourselves, it just really helps the business.
So I'm thinking also of like, you had mentioned earlier, like the difference between like brewing yourself and then like brewing at scale.
Yeah.
Help me understand a little bit of like the skill difference or the things that maybe has surprised you about like, I didn't know about this to be able to take something from, a small operation to a larger operation.
Yeah, it's really shocking. When you're home brewing and making something, I used to make beer for several friends' weddings. I've made beer at home for stuff like that. And when you're doing that, you have complete control. It's, everything's at your house, everything's done the way that you need it to be done. And, you're keeping that homebrew cold the whole time. It's maybe in a keg or you bottled it or anything. But, when you start getting to a production level and you're selling to the general public, you lose control of how that beer is being stored a lot of the time. And so you have to be so meticulous with your cleanliness and how you execute packaging without getting too scientific. Oxygen is what kills beer. Like we need oxygen during fermentation because the yeast needs it to reproduce and have a healthy fermentation. But after fermentation is done, oxygen degrades beer incredibly fast. And so learning how packaging machines, canning lines, bottling lines work and how to reduce oxygen pickup when you're putting the beer into these packages, knowing that there's a chance that this product is going to sit on a warm shelf for months and months, and you would like, when the customer pays money for that, for it to taste the same way it did the day we put it into a can.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And it is incredibly detail-oriented how meticulous you have to be with sanitation and your processes to keep oxygen out of product. So that was honestly my biggest struggle, was how do we make this beer taste the same way that it did the day that we released it into the public,
Sure. I have a lot of questions that just came to mind. It was like as you were talking, and I think it would be awesome if we could get into each one. I think my first question would be, explain how beer is made. I think like
at a high level.
Yeah, high
even.
level.
Yeah.
Let's take a step back. How is beer made? Like, what are the things that someone needs in order to actually make beer? Because, like, we have a family member or people that we know in our network who's like, I've made my own beer, and I know people at work that have said like, I make my own beer, and I'm like,
what is that? How do
you do that? like what does that take? So I think like one, how is beer made, and then two, the difference between beer in a can versus a bottle.
Is there a difference?
I want to know kind of with the benefits, or like, is there a taste difference, and then et cetera.
Yeah, I'll start with like the 30,000 foot view of beer production is where we're taking malted barley, we're doing a mash, which is essentially we're going to crack all that malted barley because we need access to, the enzymes and the starches that are inside those kernels of malted barley. So we crack them, and then we do what's called a mash, where we're just mixing water and that cracked malted barley. And we're going to hold that mash at different temperatures. You need to be between 140 Fahrenheit and 156 depending on recipe, and we may have gradual steps in there. But essentially what's happening in the mash is the starches are being broken down into a fermentable sugar that brewer's yeast can ferment and turn into alcohol.
It's called a mash, but you don't actually mash it.
No.
Okay, all right, okay.
And so that process usually takes about an hour, and then there's something called lautering, which is essentially separating liquid from the grain. And so we use what's called a lauter tun, and it essentially is this big stainless steel vessel with a stainless steel grate or false bottom below it, which lets liquid fall through but leaves the grain behind. And so once we've gotten all the liquid separated from the grain, it goes to a boil kettle. And the boil kettle serves a lot of processes, is there for a lot of reasons. And we boil for anywhere between 60 minutes to 2 to 3 hours sometimes, depending on recipe. But the point of the boil kettle is, it sterilizes the product. It also drives out any off flavors through vigorous boil. That is also when we'll add hops and any other ingredients that the recipe calls for.
And hops is mainly just for flavor, or is there a certain is there another function
scientifically?
Yeah.
Originally hops were, it was always flavor, but hops also have a preservative quality to them, and so originally hops were used because it helped keep the beer stable. And it has transitioned now that it is for flavor now.
Okay.
Yeah. So they have, the alpha acids in the hops add a bitterness, because beer, with all that fermented sugar, obviously yeast doesn't ferment all the sugar. Generally a beer yeast has about a 75 to 80% fermentation rate for it'll eat 75% of the sugars available to it.
Okay.
And so what you're left behind with is usually very sweet, because that malted barley it's just very sweet. And the hops add a bitterness that tends to balance. And so you get these beers that are way over bittered sometimes, but the goal of that is just to balance.
Okay.
And then after the boil, you need to cool what's now called wort. That liquid sugar that's unfermented at this point is called wort, W-O-R-T.
Okay.
And then once you cool that wort down, you're going to add your yeast, make sure that the yeast has plenty of oxygen. We're doing yeast cell count rates just to make sure that we have enough healthy, viable cells to have a successful fermentation. And fermentation can take anywhere from, 5 days to 3 weeks, depending on what we're trying to accomplish. And, lager yeasts tend to ferment, low 50, 48 degrees Fahrenheit. Ale yeasts are in the 68 to 72 range. But, things happen faster at higher temperatures. So ales tend to be, those 5 to 12 day fermentations. The lagers tend to be the 3 to 4 week fermentations.
Is that really the only difference between a lager and ale, is just the temperature that they're cooked at, and then any maybe additional flavors and stuff that they put in?
Yep. That's pretty much it.
Okay. I'm so dumb.
Oh, yeah,
the more I was easily going through this whole process, and I'm like, okay. Yeah.
To your question about the cans versus bottles, there generally is not a difference in taste. The main differences are, cans have obviously no light penetration happens in a can. That can happen in a bottle. Obviously, most bottles are this dark brown, and that's to keep light from affecting the beer, because direct sunlight will also degrade hop flavors and a couple other flavor profiles in a beer. And so that's why those bottles were always dark. Cans are also a lot cheaper to move around. They're so much lighter, and so shipping things across the country cans are far superior for that.
They also stack better.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's all about the packaging design, right? To be able to be, and so how many can you fit in the back of a truck, right?
Right.
It's all that.
And how many can you put on a shelf, right?
Yeah.
Because grocery stores, you pay for that
space
on the shelf, and where up high, down low, in the middle, eye level. I know that's a whole other thing too.
Yeah. That's a whole nother beast. It's interesting, When I first started in the beer industry, canning lines were still kind of newish for the like craft brewing scene. Obviously, the big boys, your Bud Miller Coors were doing cans, and the main reason for that is the bottling lines are cheaper to get into. Or at least they used to be. It's kind of evened out a little bit now, but a quality bottling line, that keeps oxygen out of your product was a lot cheaper and easier to get, 15, 20 years ago. Mostly because creating a bottling line that does counter pressure filling, which is where you're essentially, creating a complete seal and then purging out any oxygen and you're pressurizing that bottle with CO2 and then turning on the fillers to, use you're essentially letting that CO2 out of the bottle that you use to pressurize it as the beer is filling. And, being able to accomplish something like that on a can line and do counter pressure filling with, a package like a can that is harder to pressurize. Just because the opening's so much bigger and cans tend to, break or indent, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's kind of changed a little bit now to where canning lines are a lot better and easier to get at our scale. And so that's why I see so many people moving to cans. And we do still do bottles though at Epic Brewing.
It's interesting though, because I always thought that they were just carbonated because like the carbonation and stuff was just part of the process when you were like making it. I hadn't really done any research, but knowing now that you're saying like oxygen degrades it, then like clearly yes, you're gonna want to take all that oxygen out, but you can't just leave the space empty, and you can never fill it always 100% full. So there's always gonna be something in there, right?
Yep. We do everything we can to make sure that it's not in there, but it is an incredibly difficult thing for us.
Yeah, I did not know that. I'm learning so much.
Yeah, no, this is great. So like, if anyone were to walk by a brewery, there's always like those big stainless steel silos. There's usually like
they're just for looks.
No, I wanted to like, are they
functional? What's going on?
Yeah, like, what are those for?
Yeah, so if you drive by Epic Brewing, you'll see there's two big silos outside of the building. That is for grain storage for us.
Okay.
But there are bigger breweries that have, outdoor tanks. Ours all fit inside the building. Our stainless steel fermenters fit inside the building. But, you drive by, Uinta on the outside of the building and you see those giant tanks sticking out the top of the building. Like those are fermenters.
Oh, yeah,
okay.
Yeah, they're just making that much liquid.
Man.
Yeah. To add to that, brewery, micro brewery. What's the other one? A craft brewery.
Yeah.
What's the difference? Is it just size?
Yeah, that's a good way to try and justify those three terms.
Okay.
I kind of see them as they're
educate us a
I'd
bit
love
more.
to know your perspective, even if you're wrong.
It's
okay, right?
I kind of use them as they're all interchangeable to me at this point.
Oh, okay.
Maybe the difference being like if you call something a brew pub, it's pretty safe to assume there's a restaurant associated with that place.
Sure.
But yeah, craft brewery, they all kind of are the same thing at this point.
No, okay. Well, that's fine by me. I hear like the terms being tossed out, and I was like, is it just like as simple as like 5 people work here or 30 people work here is the difference between whether you call it a microbrewery or not?
I mean, that you're right. I mean, if you hear the term microbrewery, you're not gonna describe Uinta as a microbrewery.
Sure.
Or a big regional.
It's
type
probably
like that.
Like I would assume, like this is my assumption going in before we have had this conversation. It's just like the amount of volume in beer that company is creating. Like if they're pumping out a bunch, they're shipping nationwide. Like that's not going to be a microbrewery, right? That's going to be your macro or whatever else it's called. But like if you have someone who's just wanting to start up and kind of dabble in different flavors and stuff, then I think I could see that as like a craft brewery or a microbrewery.
Speaking of dabbling in different flavors, though, that just totally triggered a thought that I had when I was thinking before we decided before we brought you on. When I think about brewing in general, and I think you'd mentioned this either before we started recording or whatever, but we talked about like the creativity that goes into it.
Yeah.
Right. And the idea of like creating these recipes, right? And I think like when you're doing it at home, great, you get liberty to do whatever you want to. You want to add an extra tablespoon, an extra cup, or whatever it is, you just do it as you want to, nilly-willy.
Yep.
But when I think about going to these breweries, I'm really curious about like the process, and maybe it's different for everyone, I'm guessing, but maybe just for if you want to walk through for you, like what is the process of like creating a new recipe or like making adjustments to a new one? Is I may be less interested, but I'm more like curious. Like, is that something that happens often that you have the opportunities to be like, well, let's make something new? And do you just start like you have like a mini brewer area and just kind of like experiment at a small scale, and then you find something that tastes good? Like tell me how that would work if you're like, hey, we're gonna create a new flavor.
Yeah,
like,
it can happen in a few different ways, if I'm being honest. I'm fortunate enough at my current position that if I find inspiration from something, it could be going out to dinner and trying this dish at this new restaurant I've never been to, and it could be the food itself that I'm like, whoa, the way that these flavors are balancing is super interesting and might work very well with this type of beer. Or it could even be that I'm having a meal and thinking, oh, you know what, this meal would pair super well with a really citrusy IPA or a really clean and balanced lager. And so sometimes I find inspiration through that, but also sometimes it's, paying attention to, we have a great trade organization for the brewers called the Brewers Association. And, they're constantly doing studies on, new hop products, or or maybe there's a company that comes out with a new way of processing hops in a way that brings out unique flavors. And that can also be the source of the inspiration of, okay, how am I going to use this profile? And is it a completely new product that we need to design this around? Or is this something that could enhance a current product that we're making and we need to just tweak that recipe, and it might, take that product to a much higher level, But yeah, it's strange. It can come from anywhere, but I tend to find a lot of inspiration from food.
And then you get that inspiration, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you come into work on Monday and you're just like, guys, we're changing the recipe. Is that how that works? No.
Sometimes it does, honestly.
Really? Yeah.
Sometimes it honestly does work that way. I'll talk with Ryan and Gus and the sales team and let them know, here's my idea for tweaking this brand, or here's my idea for a completely new brand. How well do you guys think this would sell? Is this something you think we can execute? And then, then we also have a discussion. Is this something we're going to try and get into the liquor stores? Or is this something that's going to be an exclusive for our location to try and get more foot traffic, to the brewery itself? And so there's a lot of conversations that happen with that. And then once we decide that as a team that it's something we want to move forward with, then it's on me to figure out, okay, how are we going to execute this? And do we need to bring in new ingredients? Do I need to, make some phone calls to some suppliers or to the hop farm to see, like, can I even get this new hop variety? And so there's a lot that goes into it, but at the end of the day, it's super exciting to come up with an idea and then talk about it with the team, get their input on the idea, make a plan to execute it, and then in 3 weeks we're, enjoying the fruits of our labor.
Yeah.
But do you make it at a smaller scale to just like try it out first and be like, yes?
Sometimes.
Oh, sometimes.
Sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Really?
Like if it's a completely new product that I
Yeah.
have no experience using,
Sure.
then yes, we're going to small scale test that on, a 5-gallon or so test batch. Or if it's a, something like a new hop product or a new hop, hop oil, then that's something that I can take like a very, maybe a very simple lager that we make that is very balanced and clean, but doesn't have strong flavor profiles.
Yeah.
And then I can just add that product at a small scale to this other product we already make to get an idea of how that product's going to behave in a beer. And so if it's something small like that, I don't feel like I need to take the time to go through, the entire 3-week process of a small scale batch. But if it's something new and we really need to find out how this is going to behave through fermentation, then we will go through the whole process of making a small scale batch.
Of a small scale batch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you execute a small scale batch? Because I think in my head, like if you have your general recipes and you have like these big silos and all this other stuff, like you have your recipe to create, said flavors that are kind of like your bread and butter for the company.
Yeah.
But then like if you do small batches, is it just like you just take it into the kitchen as if you were doing it at home, or like what?
Yes, to a degree. It is much easier to execute a small scale batch at the brewery because we have access to, all these, cleaning chemicals.
But you don't use the full
No.
tanks, right? You do, like,
So it's
smaller.
essentially the homebrew system, like what somebody would say that they're, when I make beer at home, like we're essentially using that same equipment.
Okay.
It does scale up somewhat well. Like there are things that change when you go from 5 gallons to 400 gallons that don't scale perfectly.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
So if someone listening to this is like, okay, I want to set up a brewery, I want to either work for Epic or I want to do my own thing, one of the things I need to consider is like, what's my standard line of products? So it's gonna be bread and butter that people are gonna love, and then where can I dabble? And they kind of need to identify like, this is my test setup, this is my mass production setup.
Yep.
Okay.
Does everyone get excited when you guys make new stuff? Like does everybody in the whole group just gets together
not
and
again.
like, oh yeah, or they're like, oh man,
He's
he's over there coming up with something new again.
It is very exciting when we come out with new products. I'm not going to say it gets, mundane with the day-to-day of, packaging and making our stable core beers. It's still a very fun job, even when we're doing the IPA we've made 40 times already this year. You know what I mean? It's still very exciting. But there is something to that when, a new product and the entire team feels like they were able to contribute to this idea and their ideas were heard, and then we all executed our idea, and 3 weeks later we get to, try something new and then have a discussion on it, and would we do anything differently if we get to make this again? And it's a very exciting day when that, starts going through the packaging line and we get to, have a discussion how things went, try and decide if we can do better next time, and it's really exciting.
There's kind of like two parts that, like, when I think about products in general, right, and physical products, that space of being able to be in the iterative product development, not everyone gets to be a part of that, right?
Right.
And I think like breweries, it sounds like from what you're saying, that there's a lot more people who get the opportunities to kind of be more hands-on, especially if they're like not like these huge breweries, but like these more smaller areas, as opposed to something like, you think of like backpack manufacturers, outdoor whatever. It's like there's like people whose specific job is to do that. They do all the design, they do all the work, and then everyone else just kind of gets marching orders, which this one seems like a little more like intimate, if you will, in terms of that process. And maybe I'm wrong, but what I think I'm curious about is like, how often is the success failure of being like, oh yeah, we came up with something good, versus like, maybe
Don't make this
maybe
again.
that idea was not as great as it was sounded on paper, right? Like it's like is it like a 60-40 like success failure kind of thing based on your experience, or what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a lot higher than 60-40, the success rate. Maybe that success rate was a lot lower. My previous, I started at Epic Brewing, and then I left to open another brewery and was there for 6 years. And, those first pilot batches of launching a new brewery, the success rate was a little lower, not because the product wasn't good, but it was more, can I do this better? You know what I mean? It's not like it wasn't product that gets dumped down the drain or anything like that.
Yeah.
It was, let's learn from this. What tweaks can we make to make this slightly better? And so sure, maybe that would fit into the, that's not quite a success because we're going to tweak things a little bit. But most competent brewers can make something taste good on the first try. It's that, I use this analogy a lot, that basically any brewery that you walk into, if you're going to score a beer on a 100-point scale, anybody that's making a beer professionally is going to easily be able to make a new beer that's going to score in the mid 70s to 80s basically every time. And it's fairly easy, for a professional brewer to nail that like 80-point beer.
Yeah.
It's that last 15 to 20 points that are incredibly tedious, require so much tweaking, fine-tuning processes. It's that last little bit to make a world-class beer that it's extremely difficult. I don't know if that quite answers your question.
No, it totally does. I'm like thinking about it. I'm like, when I'm thinking about the success though, right, from a business standpoint,
Yeah.
the flavor and like coming off the line and getting it out, getting the process, chilling it, whatever it is you do for everyone to like, have their taste tests and everyone high five each other and saying that it's great. Okay. That's one measure of success. But from a business standpoint, the ultimate measure of success is sales.
Exactly.
So like, is there like, how do you determine that this is like a new product? Like what's kind of the sales process of evaluating this is doing well, this is successful? And are you involved as a head brewer in that process at all?
Yeah, I imagine it's different from company to company, but every place I have worked, I have been involved in that process. And sometimes as a brewer, it can be frustrating when I feel like we nail a 95 or 100
Oh,
point
yeah.
beer,
You're
and
like,
this is just
so good.
perfect.
It's
Yeah.
gonna explode.
We did everything perfectly.
Yeah.
But the reality of the situation is we can make 100-point world-class beer, but if the marketing is bad and the label design is bad, it's just not going to sell. It's an important factor, and it's just part of the business.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm involved in those meetings, and we're all having group discussions on label design and how we're going to market this and where we're going to attempt to sell this. But at the end of the day, it's can be frustrating as a brewer that plays such a big part in a beer being successful.
You're just like, this is so good. Why doesn't anyone try it?
Yeah.
And you're like, it's because the packaging looks stupid.
Blame the marketing team.
Do you ever like take something that was like you feel like it's good, the marketing doesn't go well, and you just like repackage it and try a different way? Is that also part or no? Or
I'm sure that does happen. I can't think of an example that's happened in my career, but I'm sure it does happen. And there's times things that have happened is, we have a beer that's been a staple at the brewery for 10 years, and we may, go through, and I'm sure you guys have seen this happen, and it doesn't just happen in beer, where people just revamp the entire label design and try and breathe some new life into a brand. And that's also a good opportunity as a brewer to be like, okay, this beer that has been very successful for 10 years and maybe is slowly declining in sales over the last few years. When we revamp that label design to try and draw people's attention to it, it's also a good opportunity to maybe update the recipe with maybe some new techniques.
Tweaks,
Yeah, like beer is an agricultural product. Things change from year to year. Hop crops can change depending on weather. Some years we have terrible hop crops, and so we have to kind of adjust on the fly to try and like match that flavor profile that people are used to, because things just change, or new hot products come out that maybe help us save time or cut a few days off the conditioning of this beer. And so things change with beer all the time, but it's something that we're very mindful of, that if we can breathe new life in a brand, it's usually something that's worthwhile doing.
Yeah. It's not as simple as like you use the same material like you would for a T-shirt, and it's going to be the same T-shirt every time.
Right. Like the Cascade hops I bought 5 years ago could taste completely different from the Cascade hops that I'm buying this year. And, we tend to get samples and lots from the farms that I can kind of like pick which Cascade better suits the products that we use. There's closer matches what we're used to getting, to try and, not shock consumers with, flavor changes in the same brand.
Oh, sure. That could be, I can imagine that could be detrimental in the sense that like you have a user base, you have a customer base who's used to having a certain flavor profile, and if that changes too much, then that's enough to potentially have them not get it again. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's kind of a fine line, because then there's also beers that, people's tendencies of what they like changes. And, there's beers that were popular in, the 90s, early 2000s, and they're completely different today. Like if you go have a Sierra Nevada Pale Ale today, and were to, compare it to a Sierra Nevada Pale Ale from 2002, like it's going to be a completely different beer, because that's what the general public has, tastes have changed, processes have changed, and so things get updated constantly.
I think hop crop farmers, hop crop farmers, like, how do you seek out one of the, like, in order to get the things that you need in order to make the beer, like, what does that look like? Are you just like looking to see, is there like a Craigslist ad or KSL ad of like, hey,
just
we
some
sell
guy
hops,
selling hops out of the back of his van?
Yeah.
What does that look like?
It's a little different depending on what I'm sourcing. We're fortunate in Salt Lake City that most of the grain that we use, I would say 95% of the grain we use, is grown within 200 miles of us.
Oh, okay.
Most of it outside of Pocatello and Idaho Falls. A little bit, up in Logan and Cache County. But mostly it's Idaho. And so I have a good relationship with, the malt facility up there in Pocatello, and I can just talk to them on the phone. That's not the case for every single brewer, but there are brewery supply groups, a couple big ones that you can basically get, from a catalog, or talk to a salesperson and order anything you need. They'll be able to supply anything you need. That being said, though, at Epic, we're big enough that I can work directly with farms at some points. Obviously it comes down to how much you're purchasing. If, a farmer or a maltster is going to talk directly with you. But we are big enough that I can, make those connections, make those phone calls, and get a little bit more picky with the lots of, certain crop years that I'm going to be purchasing.
Sure.
So it's really brewery dependent.
Let's talk about the legalities of setting up a brewery. I know not necessarily that you set up Epic or you were a founder of Epic, right? I'm not saying that at all, but more of like, in your role, have you been exposed to what are the things that someone needs to do legally to make sure their bases are covered, especially in Utah, right?
Yeah.
Our laws are a little bit more strict than other states.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge, and every state has their laws that are hard for brewer. Or I wouldn't say hard, but there's boundaries that we need to operate within.
Yeah.
And Utah certainly has its fair share of those.
Always under the premise of protecting the consumer. I think generally is what those are established for, right?
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of laws that. How do I want to say this? I was trained in Utah, so it's kind of just all I've really known.
Sure.
The 5% draft law, how Utah classifies anything over 5% as heavy beer that needs to be sold at liquor stores. That is the hardest thing for a Utah brewer, mostly because it functions well, and breweries in Utah are doing well, but it is very frustrating as a brewer that I can make, something that should be at 5.5% according to style. That is the perfect way for us to make this beer. But because it has that extra 0.5% in alcohol, I now can't put it in a keg, which is the best container for a beer in terms of there's no light pickup. It's
Right.
easy for us to fill a stainless steel keg and not pick up any oxygen. And then further down the line, somebody comes to Epic Brewing and they want to try that, 5.5% delicious rice lager that we made, but they don't want to buy, an entire can. They just want to try a small sample. But now in Utah, I cannot just, crack a keg and pour, 4 ounces of a sample for somebody because it's so high, because it's that 5.5 instead of 5. I now have to commit to, a full can. And then there's, that's waste. I would much rather be able to serve it out of a keg where I'm going to reuse that vessel. And, just for the planet, it just doesn't make sense to me that I can't just pour somebody a sample out of this reusable container.
Yeah.
And so that's honestly the thing that bugs me the most about the Utah laws.
Just interesting, like very niche specific use cases where you're like, it just creates extra barriers for you that you're like, I wish I could.
Yeah. Like a better example is we make a lot of whiskey barrel aged stouts that tend to be, in the 12 to 15% alcohol range. Like we're talking wine strength at this point.
Oh, sure.
And somebody comes down to the bar at Epic Brewing and wants to try a small sample of it. Our options are to open a can and either sell them that entire can, which is probably not a good idea for on-site consumption with that much alcohol.
Sure.
Or we open that can, pour them, an appropriate 3 or 4 ounce sample. But now if nobody else orders that product the rest of the day, that can's going down into the garbage. It would be much more beneficial for us and for the consumer if I could just pour them a 4 ounce sample from a keg where there's no waste, there's no loss.
Now I'm starting to see why so many other brewers here in Utah have a restaurant attached to them, because it's really like a mechanism of being able to
enjoy some food,
distribute, taste, try, and give to the consumers who want to try it, like in a smaller amounts without also having to like deal with the waste. Because it's like, oh well, I can, you can open a bottle of whatever, or you can open the can and you can put a little bit in this drink and then another to this person or whatever. Have it with food. That's interesting to me.
Yeah, I remember waiting tables, and when I was in the cocktail area, I would help take a keg and then load it up and then unscrew it and all this other stuff. And I remember people would joke like, "Oh, is that a Utah keg? Did you get a non-Utah keg?" And I was like, "I don't know what you're talking about." Like in my head, I think they're all the same, but this makes sense, right? It's that volume of alcohol or percentage of alcohol that restricts you to do the things you want, to have things on draft. So no, that's interesting.
Let me ask this then. for a person who wants to get into brewing or become a master brewer, what are things that maybe they haven't considered, right? Like always for any job from the outside looking in, you're always like, look at all the cool stuff. And we've talked a lot about all the cool stuff you get to do. What is the less cool stuff?
The less cool stuff is, in terms of being a brewer, you are, it depends on the brewery, obviously, but at Epic Brewing, you're standing over a boil kettle with 450 gallons of boiling hot liquid in it. And that environment tends to be, a 90 to 95 degree environment.
Yeah, so it's a little warm.
So it's a little warm,
yeah.
and it's very physically demanding. Obviously, like the bigger breweries have a lot more automation than, a craft brewery the size of Epic Brewing. And so the job is very, very physical. I talk to people all the time who, think of brewers being these, large people who drink all day, but the job is so physical that when you meet brewers, they tend to be pretty fit.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, you look pretty fit.
Thank you. So that's something, the warehouse spaces also tend to be quite warm, labor intensive. It's a hard job, and I think that surprises some home brewers sometimes how difficult the job can be.
They're like, you mean I don't get to just sit in a mini lab and drink beer all day?
Right.
No,
you have to work.
Yeah.
But that's just okay. Yeah, I imagine that. But I mean, generally speaking, though, as far as work, I'm not sure it's like a 9 to 5 type or it's like a 24/7 type of operation. Help me understand a little bit more about that too.
Yeah, it's again very brewery specific. When I worked at Epic Brewing 12 years ago, it was before the Denver facility had opened, and we've since closed that Denver facility, during COVID. We were brewing 24 hours a day.
Oh, okay.
And so, I was, we'd take turns on the overnight shift and it was pretty rough. But, we've kind of restructured it at Epic Brewing and now we're not doing 24 hours a day. And so my typical day tends to be, 6 to 3, but that's kind of my preference. I honestly could, if I wanted to work 9 to 5, 9 to 6, I could. I just am more of a morning person.
But do the operations go 24 hours, even though you're not there the whole time, or no? They're mostly
not at Epic Brewing.
Okay.
We run brew shifts from 6 in the morning to 9 o'clock at night, 2 shifts.
Okay, yeah.
But packaging tends to be that 7 to 4 type schedule.
Do you guys have focus groups? I kind of going back to
just bringing in a small group of people to
just
test out things.
Just test out, because I think in my head I got my father-in-law a pack of beer and I saw Epic and I was like, I gotta make sure he's having some Epic beer. And there was a peach one, I think, that I saw on the shelf.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'll grab this for him, see if he likes it.
Did you like it?
But I don't know. I need to follow up with him. It was actually pretty recent. So
Okay.
I need to ask if he likes
He's
it or
like,
not.
no. See.
But when you make, I think when you were talking earlier, it's kind of interesting. You find inspiration through food or various other liquor pairings with various food, or because I think you go to a fancy place and it's like, this pairs well with this wine. It's like, that's great. Okay, cool. And you come up with these new flavors. You test it out internally. You have this little micro kitchen set up, and you guys talk about it amongst each other. But do you ever bring in either friends or family, or you have a dedicated focus group to hey, we have some beer for you to test out. Tell us what you think.
Yeah, it's not as structured as maybe you're thinking, but yes, to a degree, where when we do these small batches, it's more of a situation of getting everybody at the brewery's opinion, but also sending them with product to distribute to friends and family.
Oh yeah,
to try and get more
Sure.
opinions. So it's not necessarily this structured focus group, but
Okay.
more of a
it's not
let's
bring
get
everyone,
as many opinions as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
not
That's
bring
fair.
everyone into a room with the one view side of view glass, and you
Yeah.
watch people drink
Yeah.
it and take
What's
notes.
their reaction?
Yeah,
Right.
Did they make a funny face?
Right. We do stuff like that in-house with, quality control, QA sensory type stuff. But yeah, not actually bringing in focus group type things. Not being, people, walking down State Street do tend to ask if they can come in and try some product.
Hey, yeah, it's like Colton's trying to get some friends to sign up. He's like, okay, now that I know you have a focus group, how do you sign up?
I got plenty of friends to drink. That's great.
Okay. And then as far as new products, I think that we'd heard that the Epic had created a new product. I think you brought some with you today. Is that right?
I did, yeah. So this is our non-alcoholic coconut water.
Ooh, coconut water.
We've made a hard coconut water for a few years. It's a seltzer base, so it's actually not even malt based. It's a sugar based fermentation, just to try and keep the calories down, keep the flavor focused on whatever we're doing, which in this case would have been the coconut water. And the hard coconut water, it's a 5% brand, and it's been picking up a lot. And the idea for making something non-alcoholic was, I'm sure you guys have seen, the data that, Gen Z tends to not drink nearly as much as, millennials and Gen X have.
I have not actually seen that
historically.
data at all, but
Yeah. And when they do drink, they are leaning more towards seltzers and, lower calorie options. It's not so much beer.
sure.
And, I've even had in my own experience, I drink a lot less than I did in my 20s. And I think that's a pretty common thing for people. And so getting into a new space of something non-alcoholic has been very challenging, however, very rewarding. And so this is we're still in process of, determining shelf stability, what our expiration dates are, what our best buy dates are on this kind of stuff. So we've kind of started doing some local distribution, but nothing on the scale of, end goal for this is to, put it on Amazon, put it online, have, ship across the country.
Yeah.
So we're still, I don't know, a couple months away from that.
Are you as the brewer, even though it's not, you're still the guy who's in charge and overseeing kind of like the formulation, the recipe and everything still too? Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
Oh, okay.
So it's been an incredible learning experience and something I've really enjoyed doing. It's nice to kind of get away from beer for a second and try something new, learn some new stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been really exciting.
How do you? So if you do,
Can I see one of those?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think let's crack some open. Let's try it out.
Yeah. It's actually we've created a new brand for this, so you won't see. Maybe it says Epic Brewing on there at some point, but we are calling this clearly coconut.
Brewed coconut. So it says brewed coconut water. So is this going through a similar process of like the same thing you do for everything else in terms of I guess maybe tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So we're using the same equipment. There are some very strict cleaning regimens that we go through because we advertise this as a gluten-free product. We've tested it.
Yeah.
And so we have to be very thorough with our cleaning to make sure we're not getting any cross-contamination of
that makes sense.
of gluten products. But we are
you don't
using
want it
the
to
same
taste like
equipment.
hops either, right?
Exactly. And there's a lot of challenges to non-alcoholic because as a brewer I have that safety net of alcohol tends to keep anything that could get somebody sick from happening in beer. Like it just doesn't happen.
Right.
Like if a beer goes bad, it might go slightly sour, but nothing like botulism is going to grow in beer. Like it's not going to get people sick.
Cheers.
No, I actually normally don't like
Cheers.
coconut, but this is here. Cheers. Yes. Thank you.
So the way we make this is also, incredibly low calorie, incredibly low sugar that compared to a normal coconut water, because what we're essentially doing is getting coconut shavings, masticated inside of coconut.
Mm-hmm.
And we're essentially making tea with it and creating this. So we're not actually using the milk from the coconut where a lot of that sugar can be. So
it's very much like a seltzer. Like it's like a carbonated.
Yeah, it's like carbonated water with.
It's almost like a soda. Like a sparkling.
I like it.
It's almost like a. It's not like a Pellegrino, right? Because that's what would you call those, sparkling water or whatever?
Yeah,
it's like very much like a sparkling water with just like this sweet hint of coconut.
I think that coconut flavor is strong. Like if you like the taste of coconut,
It's pretty.
Yeah.
Now that I don't have it in my
'Cause it
mouth, I can
lingers.
still kind of get a little bit on the palate there. Wow. Okay. That's interesting. I don't think I've actually had anything quite like this.
No.
yeah, it's kind of strange because we do carbonate it, not to the extent of a beer or a seltzer water, but there is a little bit of carbonation, mostly because we're putting it in a can and we don't want those cans to be really soft and squishy.
Yeah.
And so a little bit of carbonation just makes it what people would expect a can to feel like.
It's weird because it's almost as you're drinking and you're getting oxygen while it's flowing into your mouth. It's like the coconut flavor is super strong, and then it gets in there, and then it settles a little bit. Because I think when I've had coconut water before, it's like there's not much flavor to this, and I can kind of get some coconut. But like this is good. I like it.
Yes, and for all our listeners out there, we are not endorsed by Epic at
we
all.
are not.
They're not paying.
This
They're
is not
paying us
sponsored. This is
non-sponsored. This is $0. We're not getting paid to like speak kindly about this. By the way, no, clearly coconut. Brewed coconut, and it's currently not on the shelves for distribution, or
Yeah,
it
how
will
do
be
people buy
soon, or
this?
how's this?
You can actually come get it at Epic Brewing right
cool.
now. And in the next few months, we will be launching online sales.
So ideally, when this airs, you'll have online sales as well. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I like the ingredients: water, organic coconut, sea salt. That's it.
That's it. And by design, I'm working on other.
Ooh, the salt. There is like a hint of that.
Yeah, I feel like the salt helps cut through the coconut sweetness just a hair.
Yeah.
Mostly because we're advertising this as an alternative to a regular coconut water that has a lot of sugar.
Yeah.
And so we don't want people to walk away from this thinking that this is incredibly sweet. The idea is that it's low calorie.
Yeah. My only complaint is that it's not as cold as I like it, but
yeah,
I like everything.
Wow.
I like everything ice cold, but that's just a me thing. No, thank you for bringing this.
Yeah, no, this
very
is
nice,
awesome.
yeah.
This is really cool.
Of course.
What do we have any what other questions did you have?
I
Colton?
think
Did you have
the
another
one
one lingering?
The one question that I have was, what's the? I know we talked about like the less cool things, but are there any like dark side
Deep dark secrets
or things that has just kind of been either a struggle to overcome or a pain or like a fact of being in a brewery or being the head brewer or whatever, like this is what you need to deal with. I know we talked about the temperature of the place, like sure, okay, that's one. But like, is there anything else outside of that that's like, this really is something that you need to consider if you want to get into this space?
Yeah, the thing that I wish somebody had talked to me about when I got into this industry, and it definitely is like the darker side of this industry, is fortunately or unfortunately, we have very easy access to try a lot of beers. And people who get into this industry and do not have a healthy relationship with alcohol and understand how that can be problematic. I've seen people abuse, and that always ends up showing up with people that don't have moderation or a healthy, relationship with alcohol. And it's unfortunately something that you will see in this industry. And it's hard. Like we are working with a product that inherently is addictive and can potentially be not good for you.
Yeah,
and people unfortunately will abuse that. And I don't know, it's just the nature of working in the alcohol industry. And if you just have to have a healthy relationship with alcohol and understand how it could be detrimental to your life if you abuse it. And it's definitely the dark side of the brewing industry, but I imagine any alcohol industry or vice industry.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
It's one of those things you have to be like self-aware, right, about where you sit. And I know some people have like predisposed their genetics to for alcoholism or whatever it may be that might be problematic for them. But I think we all thought about that just like in the back of our minds, just like, oh, yeah, it is what you're doing. If you're dealing with it, then that makes sense.
Yeah, how much are you drinking while you're there and then after and then before? Yeah.
Yeah, especially with access, and clearly it's not going to help you perform well at your job.
No.
Yeah, people are like, it's like, look, this is still a job and people are still coming in. You're not just like drinking all day.
Yeah. And you sweat it out too. Like if you have a lot of alcohol, I mean, if you're in those hot
clearly,
environments, you'll sweat it out.
Yeah, you'll sweat it out. I'm a little curious though, and I think we kind of touched on this, but I didn't get a lot of clarity yet. So I'm curious, like, if you're not the head brewer, like, what are you like in terms of like working in there? Like, is there like a hierarchy? Is there like a track? Like for me, I would think, oh, if I want to be I'm an accountant. Okay, well, there's like a junior accountant, and then an accountant one, and then like a senior accountant or whatever. Like, I mean, I'm assuming that sort of exact structure is maybe not as firm in a brewer or a brewery of your
like
size.
an intern brewer.
Yeah, like what's kind of like clearly every location has a head brewer, right? But if you want to be part of it, like not everybody gets to be the head brewer, but you still maybe get to be part of it. So help me understand a little more of like those other roles that exist.
Yeah, there are definitely some form of a structure like you talked about with an accountant. It's going to be company dependent, but there definitely is going to be, you know, entry level brewing positions. I see a lot of breweries that have a lead brewer underneath the head brewer who's like the go-to person to ask a question if the head brewer is not available. The way I like to do things at Epic Brewing, though, is I want anybody who becomes a brewer to understand every single process that is happening with our beer.
Yeah.
And so I tend to like to bring people in to work on the packaging line for a while they, you know, learn the ropes, learn, you know, that final stage of getting a product out the door, and then have them move up into the cellar department where they're seeing how fermentations go and how we take care of the beer through the fermentation side and any additions that need to happen in there. And the cellar team tends to be the people who clean the tanks as well, which is incredibly important. So I like to see people move through the organization before they get up into the brewing position, mostly because I just want them to understand how everything works.
Yeah.
Because the brewer kind of starts that process.
Yeah.
And then passes it through the departments.
Like
until it goes
how
in the
can you make
package.
good comprehensive decisions if you don't have comprehensive knowledge?
Exactly.
Yeah. Colton, do you have any other questions?
No, I think it's self-promo
Self-promo time.
Self-promo time.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about like a little, you know, in terms I know we've already talked a lot about Epic and clearly you work there as the head brewer. Is there any other like products, promotions or other things or projects that you're working on just personally that you might want to share?
Yeah, it's kind of uncomfortable sometimes to talk about yourself.
That's all we do. We just focus on you.
Yeah.
You know, my career's been a very exciting career. I love what I do. That being said, it was a bit of a shock to take something that I'm very passionate about doing creatively and was doing it at home and supporting friends' weddings and you know, friends' events with, you know, making a special beer for them. It was something I really loved doing at home. And once I turned that into my job, I had, you know, there was a brewer that I worked under in the first 2 years at Epic, and he gave me some very sound advice. And he said, "This is something you're clearly very passionate about, Clay. My suggestion to you is make sure you have something at home outside of work that you are equally passionate about, so you have that outlet for your creativity, because inevitably this is still a job.
Yeah.
Sure.
Making beer is still a job, and it's going to have its stressors associated with that." And so I've transitioned that to, you know, making coffee, making hot sauce, baking bread, you know, all this kind of stuff that I have an outlet for that creativity. And, you know, I'm not sure that these will ever develop into another company. They certainly could. You know, I have, you know, me and my wife have, you know, created an LLC for the coffee company. You know, we haven't done any movement on it yet, but there's always that possibility. And same thing with the hot sauce. And, you know, it's really just something that keeps the creativity flowing that doesn't have to be work related.
Sure.
You know?
So do you have a place where people could buy your hot sauce and coffee?
I don't. I'm giving it away to people right now.
I saw you brought some.
That's awesome.
What's that? What did you bring today? Is it?
These are both pineapple hot sauces.
Ooh.
Habanero, jalapeno.
Nice.
But hefty doses of pineapple.
Okay.
And so I'd love to get your guys' feedback later
Yeah.
if you guys want to try these.
Absolutely.
100%. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Leave them here. We'll have a little test run.
I'll put them on some burritos or something.
Yeah.
Or tacos.
Yeah, it's really funny. Like we have these get-togethers sometimes, you know, just because we make friends with a bunch of these breweries. The brewing industry in Utah is so unique in the sense that we are all friends. I have never experienced an industry like this in my life. And when I talk to people about this, they're constantly surprised. Even brewers that come to Utah from out of state, get a job in Utah, they always are super surprised at how friendly we are together.
Oh yeah, they're like your
And-
competition.
Yeah.
And you're like, yeah,
Yeah.
but we're also bros.
It's really funny how it works out that way. Like if I go to make beer on Tuesday morning and I find myself missing some ingredient,
Yeah.
I have 10 people in my phone that I could call at a neighboring brewery. And that not only would they say, yeah, happily come down here and grab it, half the time they would drive it over
Oh wow.
to the
yeah.
brewery.
Crazy.
And I'm not talking like just a production brewer. I'm talking like the owner of these breweries
Oh,
will
sure.
happily drive
Yeah.
and donate these ingredients that we just because
Interesting.
our warehouse inventory was off or something.
Sure.
It's so unique that way. But we get these get-togethers, and the thing I find about the beer industry is all these brewers are in the same situation where they turned their creative passion into work, and so they always find these other things. And so we have these like potluck barbecues sometimes, and it is some of the best food I've ever eaten in my life.
Because people are dabbling.
Yeah, they're passionate about
Yeah.
creating things that are awesome tasting and
right.
bring smiles to people's faces. And so some of the best food I've ever had in my life have been, those brewers get-togethers. It's
All right, how do we even get invited?
Yeah,
That's
right.
How do we get to the
Well, we
cookout?
already know Clay, so
Apparently, we just need to bring him a truck full of hops or something that we're in.
here's some beer ingredients.
Well, Clay, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. We appreciate the insights; they're really helpful, and hopefully, some of our listeners have been able to learn a lot. I know I did. I learned a lot
100%.
about things. So yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.